Good afternoon. Questions on infrastructure investments in cities. Question number 1 from Neil Findlay was not lodged, although I do have an explanation. Question number 2, Neil Bibby.
To ask the Scottish Government what consultation has taken place regarding changes to the timetable for rail services between Paisley, Gilmour Street, Ayr and Glasgow Central.
Minister Keith Brown.
Consultation took place with regional transport partnerships, with passenger focus, with local authorities during May 2012 on the details of the changes to rail services between Glasgow Central and Ayr in December 2012.
Neil Bibby.
Can the Minister explain why consultation started only after a new timetable had been fully confirmed? Can the Minister also explain why he continues to insist, as in his recent letter in the Paisley Daily Express, that there will be no reduction in rail services from Paisley Gilmour Street to Ayr when the new timetable halves off-peak train services between Paisley and Ayr to 1 an hour? Is the Minister trying to mislead the travelling public, or does he fail to understand the scale of the cuts to rail services he is imposing?
Minister.
Can I say, first of all, that the timetable hadn't been agreed in advance of the consultation, and also that the process that we followed was exactly the same process as the Labour and Liberal Democratic parties followed in previous consultations. The process itself was carried out by ScotRail and involved the partners who are mentioned. And also, I would have thought that Neil Bibby would have taken the opportunity to recognise the fact that with no additional subsidy from the Scottish Government, we've got 2 additional services between Ayrshire and Glasgow during the morning peak period, providing an additional 500 seats. Perhaps you could acknowledge that. There will also be 2 additional services in the evening peak period from Glasgow to Ayrshire with a similar number of seats. All of these services calling at Paisley, Gilmour Street. The new timetable itself is forecast to generate more than 500,000 additional passenger journeys each year. Very good news for those passengers, and we would have thought that Neil Bibby would have taken the chance to commend us on that. And also, I understand from the discussions that he's had with officials that he expressed himself content with the changes, so I'm not sure why he's now making a complaint.
George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Minister will be aware, the 4th busiest train station in Scotland is Paisley Gilmour Street, and it's a major transport hub within my constituency. Can the Minister have an assessment carried out to evaluate demand for services at Paisley Gilmour Street?
Minister.
I think in discussions with the member I've made it clear that ScotRail who have responsibility for this, do constantly review their timetables. There are constraints within the current franchise which should be acknowledged, which is that if we make changes to the timetable, then of course we have to pay for that with the franchise holder. But we've managed to reach agreement in this context. And ScotRail themselves have said that they will carry out additional work to make sure that the passengers and those using the service have their chance to express their views. But I'm more than happy to have a further passenger survey to make sure that that is formalised. And of course, when we have the new franchise, notwithstanding the events of today, when we have the new franchise, of course, further changes can be made at that time as well.
John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. While I and my constituents very much welcome the proposed timetabling changes for Ayrshire between Ayr and Glasgow Central, a minor concern remains that the connectivity between Ayrshire and Paisley Gilmour Street as the gateway to Glasgow Airport has not improved. It's the same as I understand it. Is there any flexibility left in the system to address this minor concern?
Minister.
As I've said, I think in previous responses, the timetable will improve a number of aspects between Ayrshire and Inverclyde and through to Glasgow. For example, the current half-hourly Sunday summer service from Glasgow to Ayr, which calls at Paisley Gilmour Street, will become an all-year-round service, which will be an improvement to the members' constituents. But on that point, as I've said in response to George Adam, in response to the consultations that we've had with members, I'm more than happy to have ScotRail look at this through the passenger survey, find out the views of the most important people in all of this, the passengers themselves.
Question number 3, Duncan McNeill.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to assist the regeneration in Inverclyde.
Minister Margaret Burgess.
Thank you. The Scottish Government is committed to the regeneration of Scotland's most disadvantaged areas and strengthening the local communities, including Inverclyde. While overall responsibility for local regeneration and economic development rests with Inverclyde Council, we continue to support Riverside Inverclyde Urban Regeneration Company and Inverclyde Council to take their plans forward for the benefit of the people and communities across the area. We've already committed grant funding for the URC to continue with £2.5 million for 2012-13, £1.5 million for 2013-14. Thereafter, funding is likely to be available to the URC from a range of sources, and my officials are working with Riverside Inverclyde to revise its business plan and consider potential funding streams to support the ongoing regeneration of Inverclyde. We have also provided the URC with accelerated funding of £3.4 million for a number of shovel-ready projects in their area. These projects will improve the environment, improve employability in the area, safeguard existing jobs and create jobs in construction.
Duncan McNeill.
I thank the Minister for a response. I would clearly differ from the investment into the URC. I'm looking today, I see the Cabinet Secretary shaking their head, but the evidence is clear. But I don't seek conflict today. I'm seeking some sort of consensus on how we can move on and be positive in that area. Next year's cruise season at Clyde Ports Ocean Terminal is set to be a record breaker with 85,000 passengers coming through Inverclyde, the gateway to Scotland. And Andrew Hempel and the General Manager at the terminal and his team, I'm sure the Minister would agree, deserves great credit. The visitors' numbers could be increased by 20% if the berthing capacity could be extended, the quayside. Now, does the Minister agree that this is a significant opportunity, not just for Inverclyde, but for Scotland, Scotland's tourism? And will she, will she meet with the partners to ensure that this opportunity appears in the new business development plan for Inverclyde?
Minister.
Yes, I think the member makes a good point. The cruise industry is something that's expanding, and certainly within the Inverclyde area. And as I understand it, I think the member has met with the Cabinet Secretary, John Swinney, and other members to look at how this can be progressed. Also, I understand Transport Scotland officials have met with Clyde Port to discuss the potential for increased cruise ship capacity and extending the quayside. And I'd certainly be willing to meet with the partners to discuss that further.
Supplementary from Stuart McMullen. Can I just say the question is about regeneration of Inverclyde, Mr McMullen?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Obviously, regeneration takes place through many forms, and one of which is obviously job creation and job sustainability. So therefore, can I ask the Minister to provide the Chamber with an update as to the work of Ferguson Shipbuilders in Port Glasgow due to the £20 million investment from this Scottish Government to the 2 new hybrid ferries?
Minister.
Okay, and thank you for that. In November 2011, we announced a £20 million contract for 2 state-of-the-art hybrid ferries. These are diesel, electric and battery-powered vessels and are designed for use on the Clyde and Hebrides Calmac ferry services. The vessels are being built at Ferguson Shipbuilders in Port Glasgow, and in securing the contract, Ferguson Shipbuilders has not only created 20 new apprenticeships, but has also been able to support around 175 shipbuilding jobs in the Port of Glasgow and Inverclyde areas.
Question number 4, Mark MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with Aberdeen City Council regarding improvements to the Hadigan roundabout.
Minister Keith Brown.
Officials from Transport Scotland last met with Aberdeen City Council, Aberdeenshire Council and Nestrans on the 12th of April 2012 to discuss improvements to the Hadigan roundabout along with other infrastructure projects. During this meeting, officials reconfirmed the Scottish Government's commitment to starting improvements to Hadigan once the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route is completed.
Mark MacDonald.
Thank the Minister for his answer. The Minister will be aware that the traffic modelling for the Hadigan roundabout improvement showed that the works would only be effective if the third Don crossing was developed as planned. Given that the Labour-led administration of Aberdeen City Council are now considering relocating the crossing to a different location or possibly scrapping it altogether, would the Minister agree with me that such a move would mean the Hadigan improvement works would need to go back to square one, meaning further expenditure by both Council and Government and another lengthy planning and modelling exercise, and it would be far better if the Council administration stuck to the original plans for the third Don crossing, which would help tackle congestion in the city?
Minister.
I couldn't agree more with the point the member makes, and it's worth saying as well that all options to emerge from the Aberdeen City Council Stag report require both the AWPR and the third Don crossing to be in place before the solutions would work effectively. If the third Don crossing project is not put in place, then the proposed solutions at Hadigan will simply not be effective. Clearly, though, the completion of both projects would ease the strain on the Hadigan junction and also assist during the actual construction process for delivering improvements at this bottleneck.
Richard Baker.
A revised plan for a third Don crossing could work well with the proposals as they currently stand for Hudigan roundabout. And isn't it the issue that what's causing delay in terms of the improvements at the Hudigan, the Minister's insistence on bundling this project with the AWPR and not beginning work there until the AWPR is completed? This work could begin right now. It's a shovel-ready project. Why doesn't the Minister get on with it?
Minister.
I think I have to give the same answers I've given to the same question from Richard Baker over a number of months now, and I've just made the point. In fact, it's also true that Mark MacDonald just made the point that the studies which have been done show that the benefits to come from the Aberdeen Western Peripheral route require the Hodigan roundabout to come afterwards. They have to be in place before that happens. Now, we've taken professional advice on this, and we're following that professional advice, including the Stag report, which has been mentioned. That is the order in which to do this. Of course, we're frustrated by the delays to the AWPR, and we await the outcome of the court process. But we have, in the meantime, to make sure that we go about this in the right way, not just because it's going to be the most effective solution, but it's also the most effective use of public resources.
Brian Adam.
Minister, I accept that there are all sorts of consequences in the plans around the AWPR, Hudigan and the third Don crossing, but perhaps for the benefit of my constituents, you might want to consider whether between the government and the council we can act a little more quickly to end the uncertainty for residents whose homes are likely to be purchased by CPOs when the upgrade to the Hudigan roundabout goes ahead. Can we have some clarity around that?
Minister.
I say that, as I answered in the first substantive part of the question, of course we are willing to discuss with our partners, including Aberdeen City Council, how best we can expedite this process. We have the major decisions still to be taken. We're very hopeful that will be taken shortly, but the uncertainty which Brian Adam mentions is something I'm very aware of, and I'm more than happy to work with partners and to come back to Brian Adam with a further update on that once we've done so.
Question number 5, Willie Coffey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its strategy is for the rollout of 4G mobile services.
Cabinet Secretary Nicola Sturgeon.
As set out in the Digital Future Infrastructure Action Plan, enhanced mobile coverage across the whole of Scotland is a priority for us, and we continue to have discussions with mobile operators about improving coverage. Telecoms regulation is, of course, currently reserved, so the Scottish Government has limited powers with regards to the future rollout of 4G in Scotland. Ofcom has responsibility for auctioning the 4G spectrum and for setting and ensuring that mobile operators fulfil licence condition requirements, which includes a coverage obligation. The mobile operators themselves will make the commercial decisions on their investment in Scotland. The Government has successfully lobbied Ofcom to secure a high 4G coverage obligation in Scotland. That's resulted in a 95% indoor coverage level target having been set in all 4 UK nations, a considerable improvement on the targets originally proposed and one that will extend 4G services across the whole of the country.
Willie Coffey.
Cabinet Secretary for that detailed answer. As convener of the cross-party group in digital participation, one of the common messages we do hear is that communities, particularly rural communities, mustn't lose out when new technologies are introduced. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore give me an assurance that as far as is possible in terms of our powers, that the Scottish Government will do everything it can to ensure that the rollout of 4G mobile technologies in Scotland will serve all of Scotland and not just the areas that are most lucrative for commercial service providers to provide?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I can give Willie Coffey the assurance that that is indeed our very clear intention and determination. We will work with key industry partners to facilitate both early and comprehensive rollout of 4G across Scotland. We've already, as I said in my initial answer, we've already worked with Ofcom to secure a higher coverage obligation in Scotland than they originally proposed. And I should say also that we are encouraged by the new timetable for 4G rollout that's recently been agreed with mobile operators. I do believe that that will ensure that 4G services are available across Scotland from early next year. And of course, as part of our World Class 2020 programme, we'll also be looking for opportunities to support early deployment and testing of the next version of 4G technology, LTE Advanced or True 4G in Scotland.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I welcome the response the Cabinet Secretary has just given, and certainly would echo the comments that Willie Coffey made about the importance of 4G or mobile coverage, certainly in rural areas. Is the Cabinet Secretary aware of the process adopted in Germany during the last rollout, where, in a sense, the requirement was to link up rural areas before the more populated urban areas were linked up, as a way of incentivising mobile operators to deal not with the low-hanging fruit, but actually the difficult-to-reach areas before they rolled out to the urban areas?
Cabinet Secretary.
I mean, these are discussions that we are keen to have with the providers of mobile technology. As I said in my earlier answer, the regulatory framework is, of course, reserved, and that's why it was so important that we worked with Ofcom to ensure a higher coverage that applied across Scotland. I absolutely understand the concerns and the needs of rural communities, particularly communities as remote and rural as the ones that Liam MacArthur represents. So we'll be doing everything we can to ensure that nobody and no community is left behind as this very important technology is rolled out across the country.
Question number 6, Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many homes affected by external sewer flooding are listed on Scottish Water's Register of Properties.
Cabinet Secretary.
Scottish Water has been tasked in this investment period to create and maintain a register of all properties that are at risk of external sewer flooding. It currently has some 2,100 locations on that register. Scottish Water is currently carrying out investigations to confirm whether these cases of external flooding are the result of capacity issues within the sewerage system.
Lord MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Residents in the Kingsnow Crescent area of my constituency has suffered since the 1990s from severe external flooding. Despite assurances from Scottish Water's predecessor, East of Scotland Water, that the cause would be addressed, no work has taken place to resolve the sewer capacity issues. Given that Scottish Water had an operating surplus of close to £300 million in 2011-12, can the Cabinet Secretary clarify if there are any restrictions on Scottish Water reinvesting such surpluses in capital projects to alleviate external flooding?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank Gordon MacDonald for his question, which I know is of huge importance to the constituents he refers to. I do know that Scottish Water is very aware of the seriousness of the external sewer flooding problem at Kingsnow Crescent. As the member is aware, it's a complex problem that arises from the fact that sewers and drains are not large enough to drain both the sewage and the surface water in the locality when there's been high rainfall. Scottish Water is currently undertaking a study with Edinburgh City Council specific to Kingsnow Crescent to try to obtain a better understanding of the problem. And I understand that it will present the results of this study and the options for resolution at the meeting you'll be having on the 22nd of October. The member also notes that Scottish Water has significant operating surpluses. In 2011-12, Scottish Water had £74 million of surplus before tax, which I can tell the Chamber was fully reinvested in the improvement of services.
Question number 7, Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it ensures that construction companies headquartered in Scotland are provided with the best possible opportunities of being successful in bidding for public sector contracts.
Cabinet Secretary.
As part of the Government's drive to promote sustainable economic growth, we have greatly increased ease of access to public sector contracts through the introduction of the Public Contracts Scotland website, which provides suppliers with a free-of-charge single access point to thousands of Scottish contracting opportunities. We're also working with business to deliver improvements to the public procurement process. We'll shortly begin, as I've announced today indeed, a thorough review of construction procurement across the public sector, and we're currently consulting on a procurement reform bill that will embed procurement systems and practices that are streamlined and business-friendly.
Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In recent meetings with the Robertson Construction Group and Overview Homes, both based on my constituency, the companies expressed concerns about the speed of public sector contracts being brought successfully to the marketplace, and also about the number of pre-qualification questionnaires that are required to submit compared with the number of successful outcomes. Can the Cabinet Secretary look closely at these matters in a review to see what can be done to get the contract process speeded up and to remove any unnecessary and expensive burdens from the PPQ process?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, we will. I absolutely agree with the importance of getting more projects underway and getting them underway more quickly. That's why Despite the significant cuts to our capital budgets, we have used innovative ways to maximise capital spending to support infrastructure, investment and jobs. Examples, for example, like the National Housing Trust and the Hub initiative. In relation to the pre-qualification process, I can tell Bruce Crawford that we have been working with public and private sector representatives, including firms in the construction sector, to introduce standardised questions to test supplier capacity and capability, and these are currently being rolled out across the public sector.
We now move to questions on culture and external affairs. I'll give you a few moments for the front bench to change seats. Question number 1, Roderick Campbell.
To ask the Scottish Government what its future budget plans are for international development.
Minister Hamza Yousaf.
The Scottish Government has committed to maintain the International Development Fund at £9 million per year up to the end of the spending review period 2014-15. That has been supplemented by a £3 million Scottish Government contribution to the Climate Justice Fund, the Scottish Government's £2.5 million contribution to the Scottish Sports Relief Home and Away programme will also attract match funding for development projects from Sport Relief, approximately half of which in Scotland and half in the world's poorest countries.
Roderick Campbell.
I thank the Minister for his answer and welcome him to his new post and wish him every success. Can the Minister provide an update as to what the Scottish Government is doing internationally to protect some of the world's poorest communities who are worst affected by climate change?
Minister.
The latest round of the International Development Fund supports Scottish-based organisations working on the ground in sub-Saharan Africa who are currently taking forward projects responding to the effects of climate change. The member will be aware that earlier this year, the First Minister and former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, came together to launch the Scottish Government's £3 million Climate Justice Fund. The Scottish Government is providing £1 million a year for the next 3 years and is open to water projects in Malawi, Rwanda, Tanzania and Zambia. The successful projects are due to be announced shortly. This groundbreaking Climate Justice Fund is important as it recognises that those in the developed world who have the most are also the ones who contribute the most to climate change, yet the effects of climate change disproportionately impact on the poorest in the developing world.
William Smith.
Thank you, President Officer. Following the successful visit of Che Guevara's daughter Alida to Scotland last month, including visiting this Parliament, will the Scottish Government consider opportunities to develop links with Cuba as part of their budget plans for international development?
Minister.
The member will be aware that the international development budget is extremely tight, and we do, in order to get the maximum impact of that, we do absolutely focus on those countries that need it the most, so the sub-Saharan African countries that I mentioned, but also those countries in the subcontinent that are low in the HDI index. And for that purpose, it's important that it's kept to a very specific geographic and thematic focus. Although I do know the Scottish Government has, and ministers have had some engagement with Cuba and with representatives from Cuba, but at the moment there's no plans to develop for the International Development Fund to go further than its current geographic focus.
The question from Adam Ingram has withdrawn. He has provided an explanation which is entirely understandable. Question number 3, Anne McTaggart.
To ask the Scottish Government what involvement the Cabinet Secretary for Culture and External Affairs will have with Glasgow City Council regarding 2018 Youth Olympic Games under the Major Events Strategy.
Minister.
The Scottish Government is delighted to be working with our partners, Glasgow City Council and the BOA, on a Youth Olympic Games bid that we believe will be to the delight and surprise of the International Olympic Committee. The bid falls under the portfolio responsibility of Shona Robison, Minister for Commonwealth Games and Sport. As a result, she chairs the bid board on which Councillor Gordon Matheson, the leader of Glasgow City Council and the member's former boss, of course, sits on, along with Lord Colin Moynihan, chair of BOA. The board meets regularly. Meetings have been productive and all members are focused on producing a bid in keeping with the National Event Strategy's mission to develop events that deliver a clear and lasting impact for Scotland. It will also emphasise the superb infrastructure already in place and our nation's unrivalled passion for sport.
Anne McTaggart.
I thank the Minister for his answer and welcome him to his new post. And does the Minister agree with me that we need to create a positive working relationship between stakeholders, and that all elected members should be involved in helping bring the 2018 Youth Olympic Games to Glasgow and build on the legacy by 2012 Olympic Games and 2014 Commonwealth Games.
Minister.
I couldn't disagree and absolutely endorse everything that the member says. The success of 2012, the Olympics that we've just seen, was that collaborative, consensual working across all partners. I know the 2014 organising committee have met on many occasions. They also take much heart in that approach. We will be doing absolutely the same. In that spirit of consensus, not only do we have Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Government and the BOA working together, but every single party leader here in this chamber has also signed up in support, including the independent Margot MacDonald as well, and even all the UK leaders have also signed up. And perhaps in that spirit of consensus, I can ensure that the member has given an official Glasgow 2018 bid lanyard that I'm sure she will wear with great pride.
Annabel Goldie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Maybe I won't be eligible for a lanyard, but if it comes, I'll be happy to accept it. But can I ask the Minister, given the importance to the surrounding areas from Glasgow of the impact of any successful bid, is he also going to engage with other local authorities, for example in Renfrewshire and on the north side of the Clyde with Dumbartonshire, to consider what input they might have and what contribution they might make?
Minister.
Yes, much as with Glasgow 2014, there has been discussions already with a number of local authorities, in fact not just in the Central Belt and surrounding areas, but across the country. As I mentioned earlier on in my previous answer, Shona Robinson, of course, is chairing and leading the bid board, but I've got no doubt at all that she will be engaging, and the board will be engaging with surrounding local authorities on the impact, because we want to ensure that legacy is not just for Glasgow should the bid be successful, but not just even those surrounding areas in the west of Scotland, but across Scotland.
Question number 4, Gavin Brown.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made with the Young Scots Fund in supporting emerging young talent.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
Early progress is being made through investment of £500,000 we have provided in 2012-13 for a graduate incentive programme with the Scottish Chamber of Commerce that looks to increase graduate recruitment in Scotland's small businesses. The Young Scots Fund is, of course, a manifesto commitment covering the 5-year term of this Parliament, and planning is progressing well for the National Conservation Centre, the National Centre for Youth Arts and the National Performance Centre for Sport.
Gavin Brown.
I'm grateful for that answer. In the draft budget, the fund appears to be £12.5 million for financial year 2013-14, but it drops quite substantially the following year to £7.5 million. Why is that?
Cabinet Secretary.
As I explained, a number of the issues that are being developed, a number of projects are capital projects. I'm delighted to say that, for example, the National Conservation Centre is now attracting interest from EU funding, but also from Heritage Lottery funding, so will be even more ambitious than it was originally. Clearly, initially, there will be projects particularly on graduate employment and on the opportunities for all youth employment proposals, but clearly, in terms of the proposals, most of the capital spend, particularly in my own portfolio area, there's a big focus on 13-14. But clearly, if you're looking at the National Performance Centre for Sports, the progress will be made particularly in 14-15 and particularly also in 15-16.
Question number 5, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government what progress it has made when it comes to increasing digital participation across Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
The latest figures from the Scottish Household Survey, published in August 2012, report that in 2011 more than 75% of Scottish adults use the internet. Ofcom's Market Communications Report, published in March this year, reports an overall increase of 7% in broadband uptake last year. A range of initiative is underway through the Scottish Library and Information Council, schools and communities, and in the first 6 months of 2012, the Scottish Government funded projects across Scotland reached over 4,500 people, and in the Members' Own region, over the last 5 years, more than 10,000 people in Fife alone have attended internet taster sessions in local libraries. Just yesterday, Fife Council, working working with the Digital Participation Action Group, bringing together public, private and third sector organisations committed to improving digital participation, held an event in Rothes Hall, Rothes Halls in Kirkcaldy, as part of the programme to increase the level of digital participation in Fife, in particular for the over 55s age group.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. There is good progress being made, but obviously when it comes to rural services, online can be a very important source for people in rural communities. Could you give some idea of the specific commitments that the Scottish Government might to help these rural communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, clearly there's supply and demand, particularly in Glasgow. We have to make sure we stimulate demand for usage, but particularly in rural areas there's a connectivity issue. And my colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, will be taking forward the procurement proposals which are well advanced, particularly, for example, with Highlands and Islands, to make sure that we have the connectivity that's required to make sure that there can be rural uptake from the supply side.
Question number 6, John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with interested parties regarding the proposed World Festival of Flight 2013 to be held in Ayr constituency.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure and Capital Investment met with the co-curator of the World Festival of Flight 2013. In November 2011, I met with the co-curators in March, and we both expressed our interest in the event and asked to be kept updated as the proposals progressed.
John Scott.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer, and she will be aware of the growing interest in the World Festival of Flight 2013, including the proposed Aviation Film Festival, the proposed Aviation History Exhibition and the celebration of the first use of Monkton Meadows as an airfield in 1913. Given her local knowledge and role in terms of cultural and economic development, will she give her full support to the event, including the lecture series running up to the event, as well as the festival itself? Please.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm very interested in the festival. I think he's right to identify that actually film was starting to be developed at the same time as flight. So the combination of film and also flight as part of the festival is very attractive. I have encouraged the organisers to contact Creative Scotland and Event Scotland for what I think could be a very exciting event. I'm very familiar with the area. I used to spend weekends certainly at Preston Cape a long, long time ago. But I think it is an exciting project, and I wish the project very well.
Question number 7, Colin Keir.
To ask the Scottish Government what cultural exchanges it's pursuing with non-EU European nations.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government recognises the value of cultural exchanges with a range of countries across the world, including our priority countries and also non-EU European countries. The Scottish Government supports the work of our partner agencies such as Creative Scotland and the National Museum of Scotland to pursue exchanges. NMS, for example, has recently collaborated with the State Hermitage Museum St Petersburg to bring the Catherine the Great exhibition to Edinburgh, and cultural exchanges are an effective means of developing Scotland's international relations and promoting our unique heritage and distinctive culture, which in turn can open up opportunities for investment in Scotland, contributing to economic growth.
Colin Keir.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. Has the Scottish Government been made aware of difficulties by non-EU cultural organisations in obtaining UK visas, making participation in events such as the Edinburgh Festival more difficult?
Cabinet Secretary.
There's been no concerns raised with me or my officials in that regard. I suspect any concerns would be raised with the UKPE and the immigration officials. However, if he is aware of an impact on artists, particularly around the Edinburgh festivals, I'm more than happy if he could write to me. I could investigate.
Question number 8, Siobhan McMahon.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met representatives of BBC Scotland and what issues were discussed.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona His.
I met the then Director General of the BBC, Mark Thompson, on the 8th of September 2012 and the Chair of the BBC Trust, Lord Patton, on the 22nd of September 2012, who were chairing events at which I was speaking. I discussed cuts to BBC Scotland in particular with Mr Thompson. I also expect to discuss this matter with the Director of BBC Scotland at a meeting scheduled on the 8th of November 2012.
Siobhan McMahon.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer and for raising the issues of cuts. In her answer to Ken McIntosh on the 20th of September, she said, in an independent Scotland, viewers will be able to enjoy more homegrown content, including a Scottish national broadcaster that will build on existing staff and assets of BBC Scotland while enjoying the same programmes and channel as they do now. Does this mean that the new independent broadcaster will purchase the existing BBC infrastructure and resources in Scotland? And can the Minister tell me how the Scottish Government proposes to fund such a generous service?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, clearly we'll set out our programme in November 2013 in the White Paper, but can I reassure Siobhan that in terms of revenue, currently the licence fee revenue for Scotland is £320 million. We certainly will have a share in the assets of BBC Scotland. But I also remember Ken McIntosh's concern, particularly that he was really particularly concerned about David Attenborough's Frozen Planet and whether it was shown in Ireland or not. And I can confirm to the Chamber that, yes, David Attenborough's Frozen Planet is even shown in independent Ireland on RTE2's TV channel. So I can reassure her, as I did with Ken McIntosh, the biggest threat to the BBC is currently coming with the future faced under Tory government as part of the Union.
Question number 9, Mike Mackenzie.
To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to improve the historic built environment in the Highlands and Islands, given the increase in funding to Historic Scotland set out in the draft budget.
Cabinet Secretary.
The £1 million additional allocation to Historic Scotland in the budget for 2013-14 is to help the efficient management of the Historic Scotland estate and to increase opportunities for local maintenance contractors and supporting jobs throughout Scotland, including the Highlands and Islands.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer and wonder if she would care to comment on how much the cost of repairs to Scotland's built heritage will be clawed back by the UK Treasury due to VAT imposed on repairs to historic buildings, and what impact the imposition of VAT on approved alterations to listed buildings will have on our struggle to maintain the viability of our historic buildings.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government have repeatedly requested that the UK Government stimulate economic growth in construction in the heritage sector by reducing VAT. The imposition now by the UK Government of 20% of VAT is an attack on economic growth and the building environment. It is the wrong move. It's in the wrong direction. Using past data, the Treasury would likely take on the range of £25 million out of the construction industry in the VAT hike for 2013-14. But what is even worse is the fact that this 20% tax hike could discourage the commissioning of work in the first place.
Jamie McGregor.
Thank you. Will the Minister join me in welcoming Historic Scotland's recent funding support for Campbelltown's historic Wee Picture House? And will she look at what other support the cinema can receive to allow its restoration project to go forward?
Cabinet Secretary.
I am very pleased that Historic Scotland have been able to support the film house in Campbelltown. I think it's a very good example where investment, particularly whether it's in cinema houses or also in borough halls, the length and breadth of Scotland are helping to regenerate not only town centres but also contributing to a vibrant cultural scene. So I'm very pleased that the support has already been given. I'd be very interested to hear from the member any other further plans they have, and I'm sure funders across the country, whether it's Creative Scotland or others, would be interested in that programme.
Question number 10, Drew Smith.
Ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with trade unions regarding support for international projects in which they are both involved.
Minister Hamza Yousaf.
The Scottish Government is keen to engage with all sections of society and working together to promote our international engagement. There are a number of areas that we collaborate with trade unions in Scotland. For example, at the last biannual meeting between the First Minister and the STUC, it was agreed that the STUC would undertake a study to look at lessons that could be learned from the manufacturing sector in Germany with support from Scottish Government analysts. The recent Mandela Day celebrations were a positive example of Scottish Government working with trade unions, civic society and local government to engage the Scottish people in international and development issues.
Can we have a brief supplementary, Mrs Smith, and a brief answer, Minister?
I shall do my best, Presiding Officer. The Minister will be aware of my interest in the FBU's Palestinian training project taking place in Dundee to train some 25 officials from the Palestinian Civil Defence Department. Can the Minister outline what assistance the Scottish Government might be able to provide, and specifically whether or not he is examining possibilities for assisting with the accommodation of those officials?
Minister.
I thank the member for the question and also put on record and a note on record his sustained interest and passion for the issue. The Scottish Government has previously supported
efforts in international development and aid when it comes to Palestine, including humanitarian aid for Gaza. I know this particular issue is with officials, and I'm happy for the member to be kept up to date once a decision is reached.